After reading Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, I thought that I would present it in Post-it notes. Now, the novel's main protagonist is a young boy named Jim Hawkins, who lives at the Admiral Benbow Inn with his mother. Now, one day, an old sea captain named Billy Bones comes to the inn, and Jim and his mom are really interested because Billy Bones has his old sea chest. So Billy Bones tells Jim that he'll pay him if Jim will watch out for this one-legged sailor that Billy Bones seems to be very frightened of. So Billy Bones has been living with Jim and his mother at their inn for quite a while, and one day, Billy's old sea friend comes to visit him. And they get to talking, but the conversation doesn't go very well, and so eventually Billy succumbs to a stroke. So as Billy's getting better, he tells Jim that the shipmates that he used to sail with under the now-dead Captain Flint want his sea chest, and they'll do anything to get it. So later on, Jim meets this old blind man who wants to talk to Billy. He gives Billy a black spot, and this black spot is basically a verdict of pirate guilt, and that means that Billy only has 6 hours left to live. So he freaks out, jumps out of bed, and then falls down dead from another stroke. So after Billy dies, Jim and his mother dig around in his sea chest and find, among other things, a treasure map. Now this treasure map is basically what the pirates are looking for, and so Jim and his mother grab it and flee the inn while the old man comes back with a bunch of his other pirate friends and basically destroy the Benbow Inn. So after their inn is destroyed, Jim's mother decides to stay behind in a neighboring town, while Jim takes the map and decides to go talk to Dr. Livesey, who is the local doctor. And they also meet with Squire Trelawney, who is a local nobleman. So Livesey, Trelawney, and Jim all decide that they should go and hunt for the treasure. So they decide to set sail and bring Jim along as a cabin boy, and everyone swears to secrecy. After a few frustrating weeks, Trelawney manages to find a ship named the Hispaniola. So then Trelawney meets up with an old sailor named Long John Silver, who has only one leg. Silver promises Trelawney that he can help him find crew to work on the Hispaniola, and Trelawney believes him. And last but not least, the captain of the ship is Captain Smollett, who is very opinionated, very straightforward, and doesn't like Jim all that much. Jim loves working on the ship as a cabin boy, and he also loves hearing the old stories that Silver tells about being a sailor long ago. Jim's also intrigued by Silver's supposedly 200-year-old parrot, nicknamed Captain Flint after the pirate. One day, however, Jim jumps in the apple barrel because he's hungry, and then he overhears a very important conversation between Silver and some of the other crew members. It appears that Silver has nearly 3,000 pounds saved in a bank somewhere, and he tells of his old stories working under Captain Flint, the old pirate. It turns out that most of the crew on board the Hispaniola are really Captain Flint's old crew members, here to take the treasure for themselves. And after the pirates' conversation is over, everyone hears the cry, "Land ho!" As Treasure Island becomes visible from the ship, Jim goes down below to warn Smollett, Livesey, and Trelawney about the dangers of their crew. Trelawney admits that he was stupid to hire the crew, and Smollett warns everyone to stay vigilant. So Captain Smollett allows the pirate crew to go to Treasure Island for a diversion. Jim didn't think that he was needed on board the Hispaniola, so he jumps in one of the pirate ships that heads out for Treasure Island. And so once they land on the island, Jim runs away from the pirates. Later on, he hears some voices talking, so he goes over to check it out. Silver's trying to turn one of the loyal crew into a pirate, but he won't be turned. So Silver stabs him with a knife and kills him. As Jim travels deeper into the island, he meets a man named Ben Gunn, who had been marooned there 3 years ago on a failed treasure hunting trip. Ben promises to show Jim where the treasure is if Jim promises to help get Ben off the island. So now Dr. Livesey has taken over the narration. He, Trelawney, Smollett, and some of the other crew members decide to go on the island. There they find a stockade, which is basically like a fort, that was built back during Flint's time. So the men make it to the stockade, but they must deal with a bombardment of cannon fire coming from the Hispaniola, from the couple pirates that were left on board. And just as Dr. Livesey is wondering where Jim has gotten to, Jim shows up. So Jim tells the men in the stockade about Ben Gunn, and how he can help them find the treasure. Later, they hear that Silver is coming with the flag of truce. He demands that they hand over the treasure map in return for a ceasefire. Captain Smollett denies, and Silver leaves angrily. A few hours later, as expected, the pirates attack the stockade. Men died on both sides, but the good side lost fewer. Jim and his friends have some downtime in the stockade, and he begins to yearn to do something more heroic. So he decides to go look for the handmade boat that Ben Gunn said he had made. After he finds a small boat, Jim has this idea. He thinks that he can go out to the Hispaniola and cut it adrift. Jim rows out to the Hispaniola in the tiny little boat. He cuts the rope and sets her adrift, but then he loses his way and gives his soul up to God and falls asleep in the boat. Whenever he wakes up, he realizes he's on the southwest side of the island. He then notices that the Hispaniola has drifted the same way, and he concludes that the pirates left on board are either drunk or have deserted the ship. After a lot of effort, Jim finally makes it on deck of the Hispaniola, while his little boat is destroyed by the tide. But once on deck, Jim finds that Israel Hands, one of the last pirate watchmen on board, is completely drunk, and so Jim names himself captain of the Hispaniola. Israel Hands then strikes a deal with Jim, promising to help Jim navigate the Hispaniola into a safe inlet if Jim promises to give Israel medical attention, food, and water. Jim agrees. In the excitement of bringing the Hispaniola safely into port, Jim forgets that Israel Hands is still a pirate, and he tries to kill Jim. After a scuffle, Jim ends up with a knife wound, and Israel Hands ends up dead. Jim treks back through the night to find the stockade, where he thinks he will be safe. But once he enters the stockade, he realizes that the pirates have taken over. Captain Silver's parrot screams out and alerts the pirates to Jim's presence. Jim talks to Captain Silver for a long time, and learns that his friends are still alive. Captain Silver has a treasure map, and that Silver's men are becoming more angry. Silver's men decide to have a council, and after they're done, they give Captain Silver a black spot, saying that he's been kicked out of the position as captain. Captain Silver gets very angry and gives a rousing speech that ends with him showing the treasure map to the crew. Things quiet down and they all go to sleep, though Jim worries about his friends. The next morning, Dr. Livesey arrives to take care of the crew. He's shocked to see Jim and asks to speak with him. Dr. Livesey and Jim have a conversation where Livesey suggests that Jim make a run for it, but Jim says no. Then Jim and the pirates sit down to have breakfast. The pirates are all confident that they'll find the treasure that day. After breakfast, they all head out to hunt for the treasure, with Silver leading Jim along on a leash. After several hours, they stop for a break, and the pirates hear a voice that sounds like Captain Flint speaking his last words. All of the crew are terrified, but Silver tells them it's nothing to worry about and that they should press on. Once they got to where X marks the spot, they realized that someone had already been there and dug up the treasure. Just as the crew were ready to kill Silver and Jim, Livesey, Trelawney, and Smollett jump through the trees and fire their guns, scaring off the pirates. It's revealed that Ben Gunn had already found the treasure a while ago and had moved it. It's also revealed that he was the one doing Captain Flint's voice. Jim is glad to see his friends again, and they share a meal together. The men spend 3 days loading up the treasure on the Hispaniola. They also find 3 of the last mutineers, who beg to be taken on board. However, Jim and his friends decide to leave them marooned on the island with some provisions. The Hispaniola eventually makes it back to Bristol. It's revealed that Captain Smollett has retired from sea life, and that Ben Gunn now works as an innkeeper. Long John Silver is never heard from again, after he escaped with some treasure one night. Jim wishes him well. After noting that most of the treasure remains on the island, Jim says that nothing will make him want to go back there again, as he still has nightmares about the island. And that's it. That's Treasure Island in Post-it notes.